I'm Dr. Sarah Chin, 34, standing in my childhood home's dining room, watching my family fawn over my younger brother's latest achievement, a junior partnership at a mid-tier law firm. My mother's voice cuts through the congratulations, at least we have one successful child. The words don't surprise me anymore. For 12 years, they've believed I'm a failed medical student working as a receptionist at a walk-in clinic. What they don't know is that I'm actually the head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, with 3 groundbreaking surgical techniques named after me. Tonight, at my brother's celebration dinner, the truth is about to explode in the most unexpected way. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. It means more than you know to hear from others who understand what it's like to be invisible in your own family. And if this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing. Now, let me tell you how I went from being my family's greatest disappointment to revealing a truth that left them speechless. Growing up in San Francisco's Richmond district, the Chin family had one religion: achievement. My parents, both immigrants from Taiwan, built their American dream on the backs of 80-hour workweeks and an unshakable belief that success could be measured in degrees and titles. My father, Dr. William Chen, was chief of cardiology at UCSF Medical Center. My mother, Linda, was a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Excellence wasn't just expected in our house, it was the price of belonging. My younger brother Michael and I grew up in the shadow of their accomplishments. Our refrigerator wasn't decorated with children's artwork but with printed copies of medical journal articles my father had published and newspaper clippings of my mother's high-profile case wins. Dinner conversations revolved around surgical procedures and legal precedents. While other kids played house, we played differential diagnosis and mock trial. I thrived in this environment at first. By age 10, I could name every bone in the human body. By 12, I was reading my father's medical journals, fascinated by the intricate mysteries of the human brain. My parents beamed with pride when teachers called me gifted, when I won the state science fair 3 years running, when I scored in the 99th percentile on every standardized test. Sarah will be our surgeon, my father would announce at family gatherings, his chest puffed with premature pride. Maybe even better than me. The possibility that I might choose differently never occurred to him. The possibility that I might fail was unthinkable. Michael, 3 years younger, took a different path. Where I absorbed pressure like a sponge, he deflected it with charm and calculated rebellion. His grades were good but not exceptional. His interests varied from week to week: soccer, then guitar, then debate team. My parents indulged what they called his finding himself phase, confident he'd eventually settle into a respectable career. The first crack in my perfect facade appeared during my junior year at Stanford. Pre-med, of course, with a double major in neuroscience and biochemistry. I was taking 22 credits, volunteering at the hospital, conducting research on pediatric brain tumors, and studying for the MCAT. The human body, I learned, has limits. Mine announced itself at 2 a.m. in the library, when the words on my organic chemistry textbook began to blur and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The campus health center diagnosed it as exhaustion and anxiety. They prescribed rest and suggested counseling. I took neither. Rest was for people who couldn't handle pressure. Counseling was for people who admitted weakness. Instead, I pushed harder, fueled by caffeine and the fear of disappointing my parents. I passed my classes that semester, but something fundamental had shifted. The joy I'd once found in learning, in understanding the miraculous complexity of human physiology, had been replaced by a grinding determination to simply not fail. Every test became a threat. Every grade less than perfect felt like evidence that I wasn't good enough. When MCAT scores arrived, I opened the email with trembling fingers. 95th percentile, exceptional by any standard except my family's. My father's response: retake it. 95th percentile won't get you into Harvard Medical School. My mother added, Michael just made law review. Perhaps competition will motivate you. I retook the test. 97th percentile. Still not good enough. The medical school application process was a special kind of torture. Every essay required me to articulate a passion I no longer felt. Every interview forced me to perform enthusiasm while anxiety clawed at my chest. I applied to 20 schools, was accepted to 12. Harvard wasn't among them. UC San Diego is still respectable, my mother said when the final rejection arrived, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Though I don't understand how Michael got into Harvard Law when you couldn't manage Harvard Med. I chose Stanford Medical School, staying close to home but far enough to breathe. The first 2 years were brutal. Not because the material was too difficult, I understood the concepts, could memorize the pathways, ace the written exams. But clinical rotations revealed a different challenge. My hands, so steady when taking notes, shook when I held a scalpel. My mind, so clear during lectures, clouded with panic when making real-time decisions about patient care. The attending physicians noticed. Brilliant mind, one wrote in my evaluation, but lacks the necessary composure for high-stress surgical environments. Another noted, exceptional diagnostic skills hampered by performance anxiety in practical applications. I told my parents I was struggling. Their response was to hire a tutor, as if the problem was intellectual rather than emotional. When I suggested taking a leave of absence to address my anxiety properly, my father's face turned to stone. "Chens don't quit," he said. "Your brother is about to graduate summa cum laude from Harvard Law. What will people think if you drop out?" What people would think. The eternal Chin family concern. I didn't drop out. Instead, I failed my Step 2 clinical skills examination, the practical test that determines whether you can actually work with patients. It was fixable, retakeable, but in my family's eyes, it was an unforgivable sin. The phone call home was the worst of my life. My mother's silence was deafening. My father's disappointment was palpable even through the phone. "Perhaps," he said finally, "you're just not cut out for medicine." Those words broke something in me. Not my spirit that had been cracking for years. But my need for their approval, my desperate desire to fit into the mold they'd created. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I told my parents I was leaving medical school. The lie came easily. I'd been dismissed after failing multiple examinations. I was moving to Baltimore to figure things out. I'd get a job, maybe try again later. The disappointment in their voices was absolute, but for the first time, I didn't try to fix it. What I actually did was transfer to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. My Stanford professors, who saw my potential despite my struggles, helped arrange it quietly. The geographical distance from my family was intentional and necessary. At Hopkins, I could start fresh with a new approach. I found a therapist who specialized in performance anxiety among medical professionals. Twice a week, we worked through the layers of perfectionism and fear that had calcified around my natural abilities. I learned breathing techniques for the operating room. I practiced mindfulness during procedures. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt my relationship with medicine. Away from my family's suffocating expectations, I rediscovered why I'd fallen in love with neurosurgery in the first place. The brain, that 3-pound universe of infinite complexity. Pediatric neurosurgery, specifically, called to me. Children's brains were different, still growing, more resilient but also more vulnerable. The stakes were impossibly high, but so were the rewards. My hands steadied. My mind cleared. By my final year, I was chief resident, leading complex surgeries with a calm that surprised even me. My attending surgeon, Dr. Margaret Quinn, became my mentor. "You have the rarest combination," she told me. "Technical brilliance and genuine compassion. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Meanwhile, I maintained the fiction with my family. During our brief phone calls, I told them I was working at a clinic, doing administrative work while figuring out my next steps. They stopped asking for details after a while, seemingly relieved to not discuss their failure of a daughter. Family gatherings became rare. When I did attend, I was the ghost at the feast, mentioned only in passing and usually as a cautionary tale. Sarah's situation, my mother would say to relatives, just proves that potential means nothing without persistence. Michael, now at a white shoe law firm, would pat my shoulder sympathetically. Not everyone's cut out for the pressure, he'd say, secure in his role as the successful child. I let them believe it. The truth lived in my work. My fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery at Hopkins was transformative. I developed a new technique for removing brain tumors near the speech center in children, reducing the risk of permanent language deficits by 40%. The medical journals that had once intimidated me now published my research. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived monthly. The Chen technique, as my colleagues generously named it, saved lives. Children who would have been condemned to silence could speak. Tumors previously deemed inoperable became manageable. Each success healed something in me that my family's disappointment had broken. At 32, I was offered the position of Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Hopkins. The youngest person ever appointed to the role. The ceremony was small, attended by colleagues who'd become my chosen family. Dr. Quinn gave a speech that made me cry. Dr. Sarah Chen represents the best of what medicine can be: brilliant, innovative, and deeply human. Her journey here wasn't traditional, but perhaps that's why she sees solutions others miss. My parents weren't invited. They didn't know. The deception grew more complex as my career flourished. Medical conferences were explained as clinic retreats. Published papers were hidden. Awards were accepted quietly. When the American Medical Association gave me their Excellence in Innovation Award, I told my parents I was attending a medical billing seminar in Chicago. The guilt of lying warred with the peace of being free from their judgment. In their minds, I was a disappointment who'd found a small, respectable job in medical administration. They stopped expecting greatness from me, which meant they stopped seeing me at all. It hurt, but it hurt less than their previous scrutiny. My success had an unexpected side effect: wealth. Not ostentatious wealth. I still drove a Honda Civic and lived in a modest townhouse. But the speaking fees, consulting work, and surgical bonuses accumulated. I donated most of it to fund pediatric neurosurgery fellowships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The Sarah Chen Foundation operated quietly, like everything else in my professional life. Everything changed with Emma Martinez. Emma was 7 years old, diagnosed with a rare brain tumor that had stumped every surgeon her parents consulted. The tumor was wrapped around critical structures. Attempting removal risked paralysis, blindness, or death. 3 major medical centers had declared it inoperable. Her father, Robert Martinez, was president of the board of directors at San Francisco General Hospital. Desperate, he'd researched every pediatric neurosurgeon in the country. My name kept appearing in medical journals, always connected to impossible cases that somehow became possible. He flew Emma to Baltimore personally. When he walked into my office, I saw a father destroyed by helplessness, a feeling I understood deeply. Emma herself was remarkable, bright, funny despite her circumstances, wearing a sparkly headband to hide where the tumor had affected her hair growth. "Everyone says it can't be done," Robert said, his voice breaking. "But I've read about your work. The Chen technique. If anyone can save her." I studied Emma's scans for hours. The tumor was indeed complex, but I saw a pathway risky, requiring absolute precision, but possible. It would take 2 surgeries, staged 3 weeks apart, using a modified version of my technique combined with new imaging technology we'd been developing. "I can do it," I told him. "But I need you to understand the risks." "Dr. Chen," he replied, "without surgery, I lose her anyway. I trust you." Trust. Such a simple word carrying such impossible weight. The first surgery took 11 hours. I removed 70% of the tumor, navigating around blood vessels and neural pathways with sub-millimeter precision. Emma woke up speaking, moving, herself. The remaining tumor was angry but contained, ready for the second stage. 3 weeks later, I finished what we'd started. 8 more hours in the OR, my hands steady as I'd trained them to be, my mind clear despite the pressure. When the last piece of tumor came free, my surgical team erupted in quiet celebration. We'd done it. Emma's recovery was remarkable. Within a month, she was back in school. Within 3 months, you'd never know she'd been sick. Robert Martinez called it a miracle. I called it medicine at its best, skill combined with innovation, courage tempered by care. I owe you everything, Robert said at Emma's final follow-up appointment. If there's ever anything I can do. I never expected to collect on that offer. Certainly not the way it happened. 6 months after Emma's surgery, Michael called with news of his promotion to senior partner, the youngest in his firm's history. My parents were throwing a celebration dinner at their house. You should come, he said, with the tone of someone fulfilling an obligation. Mom mentioned she hasn't seen you in a while. A while. It had been 18 months. I almost declined. But something, perhaps the memory of Emma asking if I had kids of my own to save, made me accept. Family, even fractured family, still pulled at invisible strings. The house in Pacific Heights looked exactly as it always had, pristine, intimidating, a monument to success. I parked my rental car, I'd flown in from Baltimore, between Michael's new Tesla and my father's Mercedes. Already, I felt out of place. Inside, the gathering was larger than expected. Extended family, my parents' colleagues, Michael's law firm partners. I recognized some faces from childhood, Dr. Patricia Wong, my father's protégé who'd taken over his position when he retired. Judge David Liu, who'd mentored my mother. And surprisingly, Robert Martinez. I froze when I saw him, chatting with my father near the bar. He hadn't noticed me yet, but his presence here set off alarm bells. Why was the president of SF General's board at my brother's promotion party? Sarah. My mother materialized beside me, air-kissing my cheek. You made it. How's the clinic? It's fine, Mom. The lie came automatically now. She steered me toward a group of relatives, already launching into Michael's accomplishments. Harvard Law Review, Supreme Court clerkship, and now senior partner before 40. We're so proud. The unspoken comparison hung in the air like smog. I smiled and nodded, playing my role as the family disappointment. Aunt Grace asked about my little job. Uncle James offered to connect me with a friend who needed office help. I deflected politely, counting the minutes until I could escape. Dinner was announced. The dining room table had been extended to accommodate 20 guests. Place cards directed everyone to their seats. I was near the end, between distant cousins. Michael sat at my father's right hand, the prince in his kingdom. The conversation flowed around me, legal victories, medical breakthroughs, investment successes. I pushed food around my plate and wondered why I'd come. These people didn't know me anymore. Maybe they never had. Then my father stood, raising his glass for a toast. To Michael, who has exceeded even our highest expectations. In this family, we value excellence above all else. Michael embodies that value. He paused, his gaze sweeping the table and stopping briefly on me. Success isn't just about potential, it's about persistence, dedication, and the courage to achieve greatness. Not everyone has those qualities, but Michael has proven he does. The words stung as intended. Glasses raised around the table. I lifted mine too, the good daughter playing her part. That's when Robert Martinez stood up. If I may, he said, his voice carrying natural authority. I'd like to add something to that toast. My father nodded, looking pleased to have such an distinguished guest honoring his son. Robert's eyes found mine across the table. My stomach dropped. I absolutely agree about excellence and persistence, he continued. Which is why I must share a story. 6 months ago, my daughter Emma was dying. A brain tumor that the best surgeons in the country called inoperable. The table quieted, sensing the gravity in his tone. I was desperate. Ready to try anything. That's when I learned about a surgeon at Johns Hopkins who specialized in impossible cases. Someone who'd developed revolutionary techniques that offered hope where none existed. My hands trembled under the table. No. Please, no. This surgeon took on Emma's case when everyone else had given up. 2 surgeries, 19 hours total, using techniques this doctor had invented. Techniques that are now being taught in medical schools worldwide. My mother leaned forward, clearly moved by the story. That's remarkable. We need more doctors like that. What happened to Emma? Robert smiled. She's perfect. Playing soccer, top of her class, alive because one person had the skill and courage to do what others said couldn't be done. He turned to look directly at me. That person is sitting at this table. The silence was deafening. I don't believe we've met, Robert continued, walking around the table toward me. But I've seen your photo in medical journals. Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. The surgeon who saved my daughter's life. Every head in the room swiveled toward me. My mother's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the table. My father's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before: confusion, disbelief, something that might have been rage or might have been shock. That's impossible, my mother stammered. Sarah works at a clinic. She failed out of medical school. She's not. Mom, I said quietly, finally finding my voice. I think we need to talk. The next hour was chaos. Robert, realizing he'd stumbled into a family drama, apologized profusely. I told him it wasn't his fault. Secrets have a way of revealing themselves. He left after exchanging contact information, promising to send updates about Emma. My family, meanwhile, descended into complete disarray. Michael, for once, was speechless. My parents demanded explanations, proof, as if my career was a fever dream they could wake from. I pulled up the Johns Hopkins website on my phone, showing them my faculty page. Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery. Board certified. Published author of 43 peer-reviewed papers. Inventor of 3 patented surgical techniques. Winner of awards they'd never heard me mention. How? My father kept asking. How is this possible? You failed. You dropped out. You've been working at a clinic for 12 years. I never dropped out, I said, exhausted by the weight of the lie finally lifting. I transferred. I got help for my anxiety. I graduated at the top of my class. I just never told you. Why? My mother's voice was small, confused. Why would you hide this from us? The answer came out in a rush. Years of pressure, of never being good enough, of being compared to Michael, of having my struggles dismissed. The relief of being free from their expectations. The peace of succeeding without their judgment. You told me I wasn't cut out for medicine, I reminded my father. So I became a doctor without you. The extended family had quietly excused themselves during the revelation, leaving just the 4 of us. Michael, recovering from his shock, tried to process what he'd heard. You're actually a famous surgeon, he asked. Like, actually famous? And you just let us think you were a failure. You seemed so comfortable with that narrative, I replied, surprised by my own calm. The struggling older sister making your success shine brighter. Why would I disrupt that? My mother was crying now, mascara running down her carefully made-up face. We could have been proud of you. We could have celebrated your achievements. Could you? I asked. Or would you have found ways to make them insufficient? Would Stanford Medical School have been a disappointment because it wasn't Harvard? Would Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery be less impressive than Michael making partner? Would saving lives matter if I wasn't doing it at UCSF like Dad? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew the truth. My father, the distinguished cardiologist who'd saved thousands of hearts but couldn't see his own daughters, sank into his chair. The Chen technique, he said slowly. I've heard of it. We use a variation for cardiac procedures. That's you? I nodded. It's brilliant, he admitted, the words seeming to physically pain him. Revolutionary. For the first time in my life, my father called my work brilliant. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt sad. Michael broke the silence. So what now? Do we just pretend the last 12 years didn't happen? Pretend we haven't been calling you a failure at every family gathering? I don't know, I answered honestly. I built a life without you. A good life. I have colleagues who respect me, patients who trust me, work that fulfills me. I don't know how to integrate that with this. My mother reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. We failed you, she said. We were so focused on our definition of success that we couldn't see you drowning. And then when you found your own way, we weren't part of it. It was the closest to an apology I'd ever get. The aftermath of that dinner rippled through the family like an earthquake. Within days, everyone knew. The family WhatsApp group, which I'd been removed from years ago, apparently exploded with messages. Relatives who'd pitted me suddenly wanted to reconnect. Medical colleagues of my parents reached out, stunned that William Chen's failed daughter was the Sarah Chen they'd been reading about in journals. My parents struggled to process it all. My mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that swung between pride and hurt. I'm reading about your work, one message said. It's incredible. But I can't understand why you didn't trust us with this. Trust. There was that word again. My father's approach was different. He sent a single email with links to my published papers. His only comment, I've been reading. Would like to discuss your innovations in neural mapping when you're ready? When I was ready. As if 12 years of distance could be bridged by talking shop. Michael's reaction surprised me most. He flew to Baltimore unannounced, showing up at my office at Hopkins. Seeing him there, in his expensive suit among my residents in scrubs, was surreal. I need to understand, he said over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. You let me think I was the successful one. You sat there at every family dinner while they praised me and dismissed you. Why? Because your success was never the problem, I explained. You deserved their pride. You worked hard, achieved your goals. The problem was that my worth became inversely proportional to yours. Every achievement of yours became evidence of my failure. He was quiet for a long moment. I used you, he said finally. Your failure, or what I thought was failure, made my success feel bigger. I'm sorry. It was more acknowledgement than I'd expected. We're both victims of their expectations, I said. You just handled it better. Did I? He asked. You saved children's lives while I helped corporations avoid taxes. You revolutionized surgery while I billed hours. Maybe you handled it better by getting out. We talked for hours that day. Not as the golden child and the disappointment, but as siblings discovering each other for the first time. He told me about the pressure he felt to maintain his image, the imposter syndrome that plagued him, the relationships he'd sacrificed for billable hours. I told him about the freedom I'd found in failure, the joy of medicine practiced without an audience, the peace of defining success for myself. What are you going to do about Mom and Dad? He asked eventually. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to try rebuilding something. Part of me knows that some bridges, once burned, can't be reconstructed. A month later, I received an unexpected invitation. The UCSF School of Medicine, my father's alma mater and the place I'd supposedly been too weak to attend, wanted to give me their Distinguished Alumni Award. The irony was overwhelming. The ceremony was in San Francisco. I almost declined, but something, perhaps the same impulse that had made me attend Michael's dinner, made me accept. The auditorium was packed. Medical students, faculty, and local physicians filled every seat. My parents sat in the front row, my mother clutching my father's hand like a lifeline. When they called my name, I walked to the podium with the same steady hands that guided me through surgery. The audience was a blur, but I found three faces, my parents and Michael, sitting together, watching me with expressions I'd never seen before. My speech was about failure. About the medical student who shook during procedures, who failed her clinical exams, who disappointed her family. About how that failure led to transfer, to therapy, to discovering that weakness acknowledged becomes strength. About how the patients I save now are possible because I once fell apart and learned to rebuild. Success isn't the absence of failure, I concluded. It's what you build from the wreckage. Every child I operate on, every family I give hope to, exists because I once failed spectacularly and refused to let that be the end of my story. The standing ovation was led by my father. Watching him clap for me, really clap, with tears on his face, was more surreal than any surgery I'd performed. Afterward, at the reception, people approached constantly. Medical students wanting advice, physicians wanting to collaborate, reporters wanting interviews. Through it all, my parents hovered nearby, as if afraid I'd disappear again if they looked away. Finally, the three of us found a quiet corner. "I don't know how to do this," my mother said. "How to be proud of you 12 years too late. How to apologize for failing you so completely." "You don't," I said gently. "You can't change the past. But maybe we can do better going forward." My father cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the Chen technique variations we use in cardiac. Would you consider collaborating? Your neural mapping innovations could revolutionize how we approach pediatric heart surgery." Work. Of course he'd start with work. But somehow, it felt right. We'd always been a family that spoke in achievements. Maybe we could learn a new language together, starting with the one we shared. "I'll think about it," I said. It's been 6 months since that dinner imploded my carefully constructed lie. The relationships with my family are different now, not healed, exactly, but healing. We have monthly video calls where they ask about my cases and I ask about their lives. They've visited Baltimore twice, meeting my colleagues, seeing my work firsthand. My mother has started volunteering at a clinic for underserved children, inspired, she says, by understanding what medicine really means. My father and I published a joint paper on applications of neural mapping in cardiac surgery, our first collaboration in anything. Michael and I talk weekly now. He's considering leaving corporate law for public interest work, questioning the definitions of success we'd both inherited. "You proved that falling off their path doesn't mean falling off the map," he told me. "Maybe it's my turn to try." They've stopped introducing me as their daughter who works at a clinic. Now it's their daughter the surgeon, with pride that feels genuine if belated. But more importantly, I've stopped needing their introduction at all. Last week, Emma Martinez sent me a video. She was playing soccer, scoring a goal, her teammates lifting her in celebration. "Thank you for my life," she'd written in crayon on a card, with a drawing of what I think was supposed to be a brain. "This is why I do what I do. Not for awards or recognition or family pride, but for the Emmas of the world who need someone willing to attempt the impossible." My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm a disappointment who became a neurosurgeon, a failure who found her own definition of success, a daughter who learned that sometimes the greatest achievement is letting go of other people's expectations. To those watching who've been labeled failures, who've disappointed people who should have supported you, who've built lives in the shadow of others' judgment, your worth isn't determined by their inability to see it. Sometimes the most profound success comes from failing to be what others expected and succeeding at being yourself. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever hidden your achievements to avoid judgment? Have you found success on your own terms? And remember to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the complicated paths we take to find ourselves. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the best revenge against those who counted you out is simply continuing to count yourself in.